identify as a carer or not. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you tonight from Dja Dja Wurrung country, and Rachel's coming to us from Perth. Where are you? Who are your traditional owners, Rachel?
My traditional owners are the Whadjuk Nyunga people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it is a privilege to be standing on this beautiful land.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to acknowledge that our traditional nations owners are the original storytellers and wisdom keepers, and we're very honoured to be sharing country with them and sharing wisdom with them. And I'd like to welcome any elders we have with us tonight, past, present or emerging. So without further ado, welcome and thank you, Rachel Callander. We're so privileged to have you with us tonight and to be launching your exhibition in our libraries very shortly, hopefully in Bendigo Library, to showcase some of your images and some of your storytelling through words and images, which is one of your great talents. So Rachel, for those of you who haven't read up much about Rachel, is a TEDx presenter. She's a speaker, a trainer, and an award-winning photographer and author. She's written 2 books, one called The Superpower Baby Project, and the other one is Superpower Kids. These very beautiful books celebrate the lives and abilities of children who have been born with a range of different abilities and conditions, and were inspired by Rachel's late daughter, Evie, who was born with a very rare chromosomal condition. So Evie lived for 2.5 years, and yet she lives on through Rachel's amazingly generous and inspired storytelling about what you learnt through her little life and what you've continued to learn beyond as Rachel shares Evie's story and her own story as a parent around actually having to find herself in the role of facilitating and teaching healthcare practitioners how to use enabling and strengths-based language when dealing with her family and her daughter. And she's gone on to develop that work into very powerful communications tools for not just healthcare professionals now, but people all over the world. So we're very lucky to have you with us, Rachel, and I'd like to just hand over to you with just a really general question to start with, which is, you weren't always a facilitator and a trainer and a presenter, and I'd love it if you could share a little bit about that journey with Evie and what inspired you to take this work further, and all of your insights and lessons and your beautiful heart and her beautiful life to the world.
Oh, thank you, Lucy, and it is such a privilege to be among you all tonight. And yes, Lucy, I wasn't always a communications trainer in the healthcare world. I'm not a healthcare professional in the slightest. I actually am a wedding and portrait photographer by trade, originally from New Zealand even, so I'm not even Australian. So I'm kind of just making up my life as I go, and it's all very exciting. And I'm just going to share my screen with you because I've got some beautiful photos that I would love to share with you. That is... Here we go. Can you see that? That should just be my name. So I originally was drawn to photography from a very young age, and I realized that quite early on I really wanted to be a photographer. So I went to the Dunedin School of Art and studied photography and ended up with a Bachelor of Fine Arts. And after I graduated, I, to my horror and dismay, ended up as a wedding and portrait photographer, which I vowed and declared I would never do because I thought that was far beneath me. I was supposed to be a real artist, thank you very much. But I ended up photographing my first wedding kind of out of desperation for some cash, and I loved it. And I found myself just drawn to the chaos and the beauty and the families and the stories, and I just was sold, completely hooked. And so after I graduated, I started my little business, and I named it Callander Girl Photography, which I thought was quite clever of me with my last name being so fabulous as Callander. And my life was on its journey, on its path. I was rocking it. I was being traveled all over New Zealand and over to Fiji and Australia to photograph people's weddings. And I thought that I was just the bee's knees. And then I found out that I was pregnant, and honestly, that was one of the most traumatic days of my life because I didn't actually want children. I didn't think my personality suited children. I'm not very structured, and systems and rules and normal kind of terrifies me. And so this was very, very traumatic for me. And it took me a long time to get used to this idea of being a potential mother. And it wasn't until the 20-week scan that I found out that this little impending bundle of doom was going to be a girl. And I started then to kind of visualize her and imagine my life, and things started to settle in my heart, and I got quite excited about it after that. And they also revealed that at this scan that this little baby was potentially going to have a few issues when she was born, mainly a little kidney issue, but they had it all under control. They might require some surgery when she was born, but I was very relaxed with this information. And when she was born on the 30th of March 2008 in Dunedin, I just completely fell in love with this new little bundle of pure potential and wonderfulness. And we just had this most amazing kind of first few hours as a family, just kind of getting to know Evie. Yeah, so it was quite a powerful space. But then a few hours later, she choked and she stopped breathing, and she was rushed up to the NICU ward. We tried to feed her and it didn't quite work very well, and she had a very small mouth and couldn't latch. And so this is what caused that episode of choking and aspirating. And then I didn't hear about Evie or see her until the next morning, and the doctors and our midwife said that they had some very serious concerns about her, that she had a very rare chromosomal condition which was incompatible with life. And they said if she does survive, which is highly unlikely, she will have severe mental retardation. She has abnormalities and defects and mutations, and just this language, you can feel it, right? You can feel just in that moment of extreme trauma and uncertainty and confusion, this extra layer of grief was introduced in the language that was used. Because what I found was that I'd completely fallen in love with Evie, and even though you can see in these images, our life with her was quite intense at times, and she often ended up in hospital where her life hung in the balance. But she grew and she emerged and she became strong, and she was so brave. And every time we came out of one of these situations, I found that as a mother, I became stronger and braver as well. And then after she passed away, I'll show you. I set out on a mission, I guess, because I found that who she was so much more than her diagnosis. Like, she was an incredible, beautiful being. And I reckon she had superpowers, actually. and I'll get to that story in a little moment. But I wanted to share her abilities with the world. And so after she passed away, I ended up traveling all around New Zealand, photographing 75 different children with a whole range of different conditions, and just celebrating their lives and abilities as a way to kind of combat and challenge that deficit language of disability that we so often just reach for. It's almost ingrained in our culture that it's defective and it's subtractive language, and it takes ability and humanity away. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so I know that there are some stories coming up, so I'm going to throw over to Lucy for a second.
Thanks, Rach, and you're such a powerful storyteller with words and images. It's I'll stop waxing lyrical. That it is. I'm already there, and we've only just begun. But can you tell us a bit more about when you first became aware of the need to take a stand about the language that people were using around your daughter? A newspaper article came out in the Bendigo Advertiser this week, letting people know that you were coming to our region, and you know, the line at the top was people kept asking me what was wrong with her. And then, of course, you've got the medical practitioners telling you that she's incompatible with life and she's deformed and she's all these awful words. And as you say, you were seeing it from such a different perspective. Can you tell me how you made that leap to becoming the advocate for her.
Yeah, I can. And I'll go back to these images. I think I was really aware of it when I realized that I thought that Evie was responding to the world in a different way that wasn't quite the usual way of responding to the environment. So even though she couldn't speak and she couldn't walk, I feel like she had this electromagnetic sensitivity that was completely unique to her. Like she was feeling things and she could communicate without words. But every time we went through electric sliding doors or we drove under any electrical pylons, she would just start crying, and it was like a switch went off. And it happened so often that I started to think that there was something significant going on with maybe the electromagnetic field that she could feel. And so I started saying that she had superpowers as a lighthearted way to describe that particular phenomenon of Evie. And then when I thought about her character and who she was and what she was teaching me and those around her and the things that I felt about her, I realized that it wasn't like a small, lighthearted concept. Like it was incredibly real, and her superpowers were really quite profound. Like she was teaching me unconditional love and how to live in the moment and how to enjoy each day and how to be fully present. And she could express her happiness with her whole body, and she was completely honest and true to herself in the moment. She had this fragility but a pure joy about her. She was just so pure. And when I think back to how I felt about being terrified of being a parent, honestly, like this child could not have been more perfect for me. She was designed for me. Like I could just throw out all the rule books and just enjoy being in this beautiful little child's presence every day, learning and growing and playing and connecting and communicating. And so to me, she was just absolutely magic and just completely, utterly beautiful. But the language around her, like you said, Lucy, I'd constantly get stopped in the street, and the first thing someone would ask me was, what's wrong with your child? What's wrong with her? Mm-hmm. And initially, I'd kind of brace myself and I'd say, well, she's got partial trisomy 9 and partial monosomy 6, and she's got multiple ventricular septal defects, and she can't walk and she can't talk, and she's got respiratory issues and blah, 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 all of the list of the diagnosis thing, whatever that she had. And in that moment, I just felt like I'd really just betrayed her and who she was. I hadn't described her or how I loved her or her character or anything about her that was remotely human. I just described a collection of failing body parts and big scary words to a person. Mm. So then that's what they saw. And so they would walk away disconnected, and I would walk away disconnected and completely just feeling like crap. I was like, oh, I hate this sinky feeling in my tummy. Like, this isn't Evie. But with this new language of superpowers and my, I guess it sort of elevated me and helped me to see her as a human. I already saw her as a human, but I think it helped me describe her as a human to strangers. It kind of reframed the narrative. Mm. So when people ask me, when they ask me what's wrong with her, with my new language and mentality, I could just say, well, actually, nothing's wrong with her. She's actually got superpowers. And then they'd ask me, well, what do you mean? And then I got to, spiel off all of the greatness about Evie and how wonderful she was and how I loved being her mum and how funny she was and how cute she was and how brilliant and hilarious and how we could make up games together and how she loved being on a beanbag and loved being in the water, and she was so easy to take everywhere and she never had a tantrum in her life. And then, they looked at her again and they'd say, oh, isn't she beautiful? Look at those big sparkly eyes and those delicate fingers. I'd say, yeah, she's so cool. She's just the best human out, And in that moment, like, they saw the beautiful human being. They saw a child, and there was so much connection, and all of that fear just dissipated. And it has so much to do with the language and how we view things. Like, I guess language is the manifestation of an inner belief that we have in our inner value system. And so when we're afraid of difference, when we're afraid of disability or afraid of abnormality, that's what's going to come out of our mouth, like in our language. But if we can break down those fears and address the fears and find the connections, then that language just naturally catches up, I think.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that, Rachel. That's just so powerful. And I've just noticed that my internet connection might be a bit unstable. So if I lose you for any reason, just carry on. You're doing a beautiful job.
Thank you. I can see you there. If I ever lose you, I'll just keep chatting.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll find my backup plan, but it might take me a bit to activate it.
Right, we got this, Luce. We got this.
Yeah. So again, this piece about language is such a powerful educator in those one-on-one exchanges that you were able to have with people, but you wanted to scale it up and make an impact a bit more broadly. So can you tell us what you did to do that?
Yeah, well, what happened was I found that it happened so much in the medical realm. I was constantly faced with this negative language, and especially with forms like the NDIS or needs assessment forms. And basically, I couldn't ever answer a single question on the documents that they were asking me. You know, can your child do X, Y, and Z? No, like 2 pages of blankness. And I just had the same sinky feeling that when I handed in this empty document, that the person at the other end would read this empty document and think, well, here's a child that's costing the system a lot of money and has no value and is a bit of a blob and can't do anything. Potentially we'll give them some more financial or medical help. But to be honest, that wasn't the most important thing to me at the time. Like, yes, that was great, but I just wanted my child to be seen as valuable and beautiful and clever and growing in her own way. And so I made up my own form to go alongside this needs assessment form, and I called it Evie's awesomeness because she was just completely awesome. And as you can see from the questions, they're quite random, very random questions, because I made them up myself. These were my questions. And the cool thing about an awesomeness form is that you can't make one wrong. And the trick is to answer yes to something that's already being able to be done. So basically, think of a question of something that Evie was already doing, and I could say, yes, she can do this thing. And it made me feel so happy and so empowered and so overjoyed that this little document basically became a measuring stick that I could use for Evie. Like, I could measure her only against herself, because so many times we're measuring humans against measuring sticks that just aren't applicable. And it happens right from day one, before day one, you know, even in the womb, the baby's being measured and prodded and, you know, what's normal, and we're measuring against normal basically from the time of conception. It's just measure, measure, measure. Where do you fit in the box? You know, tick this, check that. And it's just ridiculous. Like, I think we need to stretch normal as far and as wide as we possibly can, so people are included for what they can do and their abilities and what they bring to the world. And so this awesomeness form was my little way of kind of starting that conversation about measuring Evie against herself, because while none of these questions will ever make it onto an official document, maybe one day they will. I'm hoping the more I share this story, the better chance I have, I reckon. But I could see that she was growing in her own way, in her own time. And that's all a parent or a person needs, is to be able to, I guess they need their life and their abilities witnessed, no matter how small that is, because it's a big deal. All of this stuff, all of this growth was a huge deal in our life, and a cause for a lot of celebration. And I've shared this concept with all sorts of people around the world, healthcare professionals and education specialists. And you can see it's a kind of a funny slide, but basically these are just some responses from different people using this idea. And on the slide on the left is a mother's reaction to seeing the first paragraph of this neuro summary celebrating their child. Like, how amazing, because a parent or a family receives like hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper that often it starts with all of the things that are wrong and the diagnosis and all the labels. But having just a sentence or a phrase that starts with humanity is just the most beautiful way of connecting as humans. And I think it just builds so much trust, because I'm so passionate about the relationships between healthcare professionals, especially, and parents and patients and families, because so many times I think these relationships are being damaged by the language that's used, and the attitudes and the belief systems and phrases that are understood, and the dehumanizing that so often happens in this space.
I think that, you know, it could stretch to education too. And
for sure.
you know, I'm relating just in a very small way. My son has learning difficulties and was diagnosed with dyslexia at a fairly young age. And I remember one educator who was supporting us, and we were, you know, I was so full of all the tests that we'd had to do and all the difficulties that he was having, and I was having to retell this story about how hard life was for him in a classroom. And, you know, there was a bit of probably parental story about, God, you know, what did I do? Did I do something wrong while I was pregnant, or did I push the pram over bumpy terrain when he was born, and do something, you know, all this stuff. And you get so caught up in it. And this teacher said to me, said to us, he wrote us an email and he said, really excited to be working with your son. These are all the things that I have just found to be such great strengths in him. Let me know what you think his strengths are. And that was the starting point of our interaction and our engagement. And it just flipped everything for us as parents. So he, in that case, became, you know, the advocate and teacher for us, to see it from a totally different perspective. And it set us off on a completely different course around the privilege of parenting this kid with all this cool stuff going on in his personality and his way of being in the world. And it wasn't that he didn't fit the world, it was the world that he was in that moment didn't fit him. But I wanted to, I know you've got another form to show us, which I'm keen to see, because you developed another one to help explain some of this to health practitioners. But I'd like to invite our audience. We're getting some lovely comments from people. Kat says normal is overrated, and she loves the awesomeness form and needs to make one. So I thought maybe a little activity we could do while you're moving on to the next bit, Rach, if people feel inspired, is to tell us one thing you would put on your awesomeness form if you were writing about yourself or the person in your care, in the chat box, if that's okay. And don't worry if that's not okay.
It's a great idea, Lucy. We're going off script here, people. I love it when Lucy does this.
All right, back to you, Rach. Sorry, I interrupted where you were heading.
No, it's brilliant. And I love that you told that story, because yes, it does make such a difference. And it feels like it's such a simple shift, and it doesn't take longer, or it doesn't take any extra effort. It's just a simple shift in attitude. And I guess it's a heart belief. And yeah, maybe that is harder for some people than others, but I don't know. But yes, I have got something I'd love to share with you. So let's continue. We're doing so well. So I've developed a language tool that I've been sharing with healthcare professionals and all sorts of different people, educators as well. And please take photos of the screen if you want to screen share or anything you like that might be useful for you in your own worlds. But I believe that language falls into one of these 4 quadrants. We've got the positive and negative axes, and then the jargon and formative. And it's interesting because a lot of this language you will have experienced in your life. And so I'm interested to kind of have a little chat about this. So in the positive jargon axis, we have patronizing language. And it sounds bad, and it kind of is, but it comes from a really, really well-meaning place. That's where the positivity comes in, but it's sort of a bit overly fluffy. And it is actually a reaction to fear of not knowing what to say. And so you kind of end up with cliches that can end up feeling patronizing and fluffy. So a lot of parents that I've interviewed have heard all sorts of this kind of language, things like you're only given what you can handle, or, you know, special kids are only given to special parents. And that's very well meaning, and some parents do eventually find that quite meaningful. But right in the beginning at diagnosis, or if they haven't actually been listened to, a parent in this space isn't often feeling special. They're feeling overwhelmed and isolated and exhausted and traumatized, and they're grieving. And it just kind of almost adds to the burden that they now have to be special as well as coping with everything else. Or they get called super mom, or, you know, and it's just, it is that cliche, but it's really tricky, because the person giving this language really wants to be helpful, but they haven't understood where the person's at, because they're afraid. It's a very awkward space. And then in the confusing quadrant here, jargon negative, this is just where I think a lot of language of medicine naturally falls, because most people who speak medicine have taken, upwards of 7, a decade, years to learn this. And regular person language, you don't usually speak medicine, there's a disconnect. And so all of a sudden, when you're thrown into the medicalized world of big, scary words, it takes a while to learn the language. And so I think especially healthcare professionals need to have grace and help teach the families this new language. But it's just sort of blurted out and delivered. And I think they're doing it because they're doing their job, they're giving all the information, but it's so confusing and it goes over people's heads and it just adds to the trauma. And I remember when our senior pediatrician came in to tell us that Evie had this very rare condition, partial trisomy 9 and partial monosomy 6. Like, how many of you just glazed over when I said that? Like, I couldn't even spell the thing. I couldn't even get a concept of what this word looked like. My pediatrician was English. He had an accent. It's tricky when people have an accent that you don't usually speak, and you're just trying to hold on to any kind of anchor point. And it turns out that I'm a carrier for what Evie has, and I was just learning this in that moment, and we'd had genetic testing, and so he was trying to explain how I'm okay and why Evie's not okay, and so he was using all these metaphors, and it was just ridiculous. He sort of explained it like a library book. Your body is like a library and all of the information is there, but Rachel, your body, some of the chapters of Game of Thrones have ended up over there in Pride and Prejudice, which would be the weirdest book in the history of the world anyway. But he said, but because your brain is so clever, it can unscramble where the chapters are, and because nothing's missing, it's just they're all over they're in the wrong place. But Evie, she's got missing chunks of Pride and Prejudice and missing chunks of Game of Thrones and too much of something else over there, and that's how she is. And I'm like, when you're exhausted and you're tired, you have no idea what's going on. You can't even find an anchoring point. And so I'm just trying to land on anything that I could understand. I remember that scene, like I didn't even know how many tests had been done on Evie at that point. We were still living in hospital. I was exhausted. I knew he was a busy man. My one job was to understand, but I just felt completely stupid, and I started to glaze over. My amygdala was well and truly on the way to being hijacked by this point. And I heard him say short arms, and that was the only 2 words in the whole sentence that I understood. And so then I was thinking about Evie and her arms, and I was thinking, gosh, her arms are quite perfectly longish looking to me. I wonder why he's going on about the short arms. Anyway, kept going on about the short arms, and then at the end of his giant spiel, he asked me as he was walking out the door, looking at his watch, do you have any questions? And I was like, yes. I piped up bravely, yes, I have a question. What are we going to do about Evie's short arms? And he just kind of looked at me like I was the biggest dummy in the whole world and said, well, nothing, they're fine, and walked out the door. And so I just felt completely ashamed of myself. Like, my one job was to understand what he was telling me. I had no idea what he had just said. I was all confused with library books and short arms, and I didn't know what he'd said. So it was actually a waste of his time. And I just felt yucky. Like, I felt stupid and traumatized, and I was grieving and I was uncertain. And all of these emotions all just bundled up into this mega emotion of anger. And I kind of almost metaphorically threw it at him. It's like, I hate that doctor. He made me feel stupid. Like, how awful, and I think there are so many families out there carrying this grief and this anger of just this prolonged trauma from not understanding, being made to feel confused, or being made to feel small, or feeling completely out of their depth and no one understanding, and just being stuck in that confusion. And so these parents are reliving this kind of this fear, anger, grief, turmoil again and again and again. And so they're meeting healthcare professionals with this kind of this wall to protect them from feeling these icky, awful, overwhelming feelings. And that's the barrier between patients and health professionals often, this anger and this hurt and this pain. And we're not connecting. And it sucks for everyone.
That's right. And a huge power imbalance. you know,
Yeah.
as you described. So tell us, so presumably the destructive language that you're talking about is those words that you referred to at the start, you know, the really negative stuff about abnormalities and incompatibility with life and whatnot.
Yeah, you can feel it, right? You can feel that language is different. Like even retarded, you know, this word is used as a weapon to hurt somebody intentionally these days. Culturally, it's no longer appropriate or acceptable to use. And abnormal, dysmorphic, defective, you know, even to an extent disabled, like this at dis, you know, that dis is actually a very negative subtractive piece.
Yeah.
And depending on how it's used, it can be quite hurtful. Mutated, yeah, that incompatibility with life. Even I've had beautiful friends of mine who have had miscarriages, and they come into the clinic, and you know, yesterday they were having a baby, and then today now it's a product of conception or debris, you know, and just that simple shift is this beautiful dream has turned into a product of conception or debris. Right? That is destructive, dehumanizing, adds to the trauma of the situation. You can feel it, right? You get that sense. And so there's people carrying not only that, it's sort of like secondary trauma, you know, the trauma of the event and how it made them feel in that moment as well. Yeah. But there is hope. There is hope. There's an
Tell us then about the empowering quadrant.
It's not all doom and gloom. Empowering language, positive and informative. And I think that this kind of language, it actually does less talking. It asks a lot of questions. It seeks to find connection and humanity. Just like you were saying with your son, Lucy, you know, that teacher was like, I love how your son's this and that, and he's got this characteristic, and these are his strengths. You know, it seeks to connect on a human level. It's clear and it's kind, and it seeks to understand a baseline of literacy and understanding. And the first time I received this was from a clinical geneticist who was supposed to help us explain, you know, what was going on with my body and Evie's body. The first thing he said to me was, Rachel, what do you know about chromosomes? You know, asked a great question that I could answer. Look, I have no idea. I couldn't even draw you one. And so he was basically in that moment just establishing where our ground zero of understanding was and how we could build. Like he was teaching me the language from, you know, the ABCs essentially of genetics. Do you know what a chromosome is? Like, here's the alphabet. We'll start there essentially. And so he drew some squiggly lines and was explaining as he goes. And then I don't know if any of you out there have ever seen a chromosome, but there's a short and a long arm of a chromosome. And so when he drew this thing, I was like, oh, I see it, I get it, the chromosome. The other doctor was trying to explain. So in that moment, I got all excited because I had learned something. I'd learned something that was going to help me on this journey. He demystified something. He was helping me along. He's like, this is your first lesson. And he's going to be with me the whole way. You know, it was beautiful.
Wow. So powerful. So Rach, tonight's all about carers, and we've got, so Kat's just said, so Evie didn't literally have arms that were short. No, that was... No,
it was the chromosome. My amygdala had been hijacked by that point, and that's all I heard. So I just assumed he meant that Evie had short arms, but no. No, Evie's arms were perfectly longish, it turns out. They were lovely arms, delightful little arms. Yeah. I'm with you, Kat. See, I was confused then too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Rach, our audience are people of all ages and stages of life who are either caring for people who need extra support in life, or who might be themselves living with various disabilities and abilities. I'd love to hear more about the journey that you went on to connect with other families in similar situations to yours, and capture their stories, and provide that mirror that you had found for yourself of the beauty and the joy in parenting this beautiful child, and help them to see it in the same way, and then hand it out to the world and help the world see it in the same way.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. It was amazing. with both of the books, actually, just how powerful that experience was for myself. I found it really healing, actually. I did it 3 years after Evie passed away. I started the first project, Superpower Baby Project in New Zealand. But what I noticed was unanimously, when I asked the families questions about their child, the first thing that they would do is jump to the conditions and the problems. They'd say, tell me about your child. And the first thing they'd say is, well, they've got Down syndrome and they can't do this and they can't do that. And I'd have to say, well, slow down. And I mean, tell me about your child, like nothing to do with their diagnosis. You know, you can't be diagnosed with your identity. The diagnosis is part of that identity, but I wanted to know, tell me about your child, their humanness, their humanity, and their abilities. And so that was a really nice reframe. And for many of them, they had never spoken positively about their child before. And some of these kids, you know, that 5, 6 years old, and some families were terrified to even take them out in the street because they weren't strong enough in themselves to combat those what's wrong with you questions, because they knew it was coming. Like it just was too much. Like even just getting out of the house was a big enough deal for some of these families. And then to be bombarded by those questions, or even not the questions, just the staring. A lot of them, it's like, I can't handle the staring. Like, I just desperately want someone to ask me about my child, you know. These parents just wanted to gush and share their story. And it's so tricky because no one knows what to say, and they don't want to say the wrong thing. And that's when you get that language, patronizing language again. There's a lot of people in the street that really do want to connect and they don't want to stare, but they don't know what to ask. And so we did a lot of work around that. You know, a lot of the families said, just come up and ask, you know, what's your name, or tell me about your wheelchair, or that looks like a fun, what are you doing today, where are you off to, what's going on for you today, or what do you enjoy about life. So it's just kind of almost having a toolkit of questions in your heart ready to go, and an open curiosity and a desire to connect. Yeah, but the families desperately wanted that interaction. It's so hard. And as so many of them said, you know, we watch our child in the playground be excluded and then end up on the side, and they know that that's going to be life. And so it's like, how do you support that, and how do we as a culture become bigger? And I guess it does come down to that expansion of normal. It's like, how do we create a world that is inclusive and safe? And I think it just comes down to an acceptance that we're all so very different. And that's important.
Absolutely. So you've shared some really emotional stuff, and I'm sure people are sitting there feeling incredibly moved, as I am. And I wondered if now might be a nice opportunity to give people a little breather and to show us some more of your beautiful images from that time and that project.
I can do that, darling. Yes, so snuggle and hopefully nice and comfy, everybody, because I would love to show you a slideshow of images from both of the books. I just need to go to my special...
And we've got question time coming up, so have a think.
Oh, sorry.
I'd like to ask. That's all right, go for it. Oh, thanks, Rach. I've watched that a number of times and it still chokes me up. It's beautiful.
Oh, they're such cool kids. And I just, maybe in the chat box, if you feel like you want to, often I ask audiences, you know, what do you see in those photographs? What did you see? And then throw them out in the chat box. Joy and love, yes. Joy, yes.
Yeah.
Potential cat, yes. Yeah. Exactly. And this is what audiences say over and over again. And then when you think of that language that we used earlier to describe this difference, you know, it's usually words like defective and dysmorphic and disabled and retarded and mutated, and it's just not. You know, these kids have so much joy and so much ability and so much love and so much, they're so vibrant, you know. And a lot of people say their eyes, all of their eyes are so amazing, and they were amazing because they were so connected. We were so engaged, and so many of these kids were non-verbal, and yet we were able to make this beautiful space together where they were being photographed just completely as they were. And it was just the most privileged. I felt so privileged to be able to make those images of those beautiful children. It was one of the happiest times of my life creating those books. Yeah. What
a extraordinarily beautiful way to treat your grief.
Yeah. It has been it has been beautiful, actually. And Evie died, gosh, it'll be 11 years this October. We just had the 10-year anniversary, and that's a long time ago. And so my story and my grief has morphed and changed into a space where I feel I still miss Evie, but it doesn't hurt me anymore. But I have this sense of just utter gratefulness and gratitude and wonderment at the life that we shared when she was here alive, but also the life and the trajectory that I'm on. Like, it's crazy, you know. I speak to healthcare professionals all around the world about their communication, and Lucy, that's how Lucy and I met, speaking at a conference. And it was really funny. We were at one conference, and a man came up to me. He's a pediatrician, and he said to me, "Oh, I've just been schooled in communication by an ex-wedding photographer." And I was like, yeah, you have. He said, it was great, you know. So like, hats off to him that he will listen to an ex-wedding photographer. Like, that's a good doctor right there. But yeah, it's very bizarre, you know. That's what I say. Life is quite amazing, but if we keep this narrow normal, you miss out on all of the rest. And it's so good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do our audience have any questions for Rachel? Now's your opportunity.
I know it can be scary. If no one has any questions, I don't want to jump in before anyone has a question, but I did have a couple of more tips and tricks on the kinds of questions that you potentially might be able to think about asking in the empowering question quadrant that might really help in the work as carers, especially with your the people that you're supporting, to get some really powerful interactions going. So maybe I can jump there. And if you think of any questions along the way, just jump them in the chat box, and we will do that, because I know that is interesting to you guys.
Yeah,
I kind of jumped all over the place a little bit because, oh, no. So I thought, let's go here. I'm doing so well. Usually I have a tech guy, my husband, but he's downstairs on another call, so I'm all by myself today, and I'm very proud of myself. I haven't screwed it up yet. Too badly. We're doing good. But here we go. So I think that there are, maybe these are 4 broad umbrella topic questions that you can think about as themes almost for your questioning. So when you think about questions about what somebody might be proud of, you know, I get my audiences to think of as many different ways of asking these 4 questions. Think of as many different ways that you could ask this of a person that feels right to you in your own words and your own language. It could be, you know, what gets you up in the morning, or what excites you about life, or what do you feel really good about doing, or what do you feel you're really good at? What are you proud of? What do you get a sense of accomplishment in? Those kind of questions. And then other kind of questions, you know, what are you hopeful? What are you looking forward to? Or what does a meaningful day look like for you? Or what do you enjoy most? Or what would you enjoy? Those kind of questions. And then if you can ask a little bit deeper, what are you concerned about, or what's keeping you up at night, or is there anything that's on your mind? Is there anything that you're afraid of? Is there anything that I can support you with? Those kind of questions. And then what do you need, or how can, what would make you feel supported? Or is there anything that you think is lacking? Or is there anything that would enhance your experience? Is there anything that you would enjoy that you don't have right now that we can work towards? And so you can get a sort of a sense that these questions really speak to the dignity of a person and the capability of a person, but also the vulnerability and the humanity of a person. And so if you can kind of ask people questions around these 4 major themes, you can get a really great sense of who's in front of you. And so all of that assumption disappears. So then you're not kind of landing in cliche and patronizing. You're really asking, you know, what do you need right now? Is there anything lacking? Or what would support look like to you in this moment? So instead of just assuming something, you can really ask a question to figure out, where's our ground zero here? And then I'll just show you this quick one. I often do this exercise in workshops, and I know some of them are upside down, but look at all these questions. You know, this is kind of what happens when you really think into this space. You end up with just heaps of amazing questions that are in your own voice and your own language. And if you can imagine a teacher or a carer or a doctor coming into their clinic with this kind of toolbox in their pocket, as well as all of the information they have, I think it really directs the care and the knowledge in a way that's really tailored and hones into what that person in front of them really, really needs in that moment. And so it's just about opening up your heart and your mind to seek that connection first, rather than just blurting out all the knowledge and the assumption. Because that's the thing, we assume so much because we only have our own life experience to go on, and we just assume that everyone should want what we want or needs what we want. And that's not always the case. So we ask. Makes it much easier.
Thank you. That's a really powerful tool for all relationships, really, isn't it? And for building connections in the world much more broadly.
Yeah, definitely.
Kat has just shared, when her son started school, they asked her what she wanted for him, and she said, I just want him to enjoy school.
Yeah.
And she's also asked, is that in your book, Rachel? So I don't think it is it? But you've got a white paper that you're happy to share with everybody, is that right?
Yeah, I've got a white paper I'm happy to share. What I also can do, because this is just quite a new model that I've developed over the last year, it's part of a program that I've been delivering. I will send you the slides and all of the things. So I'll send that through to Lucy and Lee, and then she can send it to everyone that was here. And if I'm more than happy to do up a resource pack for you guys.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. I really love what you said then about we only have our own life experience to draw from, and we can make so many assumptions from that place if we don't open our eyes and our hearts and our question. You know, that I really loved what you said about the empowering quadrant of communication is about saying less and listening more, asking questions, and those beautifully framed examples of the sorts of questions we might ask.
Yeah, it's amazing how many examples of that are in the world. We've got an amazing senator here in WA, Senator Jordan Steele John, and he was born with cerebral palsy, and he's lived his whole life in a wheelchair, but the focus from kind of almost day one from his doctors was, we need to get this boy walking, we need to get him walking. And he just was like, I have no interest in walking. I'm quite happy in my wheelchair, but I really want to learn maths and this and this and debating, because I'm really passionate about words and speaking. So I don't care if I live my whole life in a wheelchair. But everyone was so focused on getting him walking that he missed out on so much of the things that he would have really benefited from, because they wanted to make him normal. But he's an exceptional person. And it's great that he tells this story in his own words, but I'm like, that's exactly the example of, you know, we assume that people want what we want.
Yes.
Not true.
Yeah. Yep. Again, just from Kat, she's doing some lovely sharing. Thank you, Kat. And Jenny has to leave, sorry, but thank you. Kat's a teacher studying inclusion at uni and mum to a boy with neurodiverse superpowers. So she's finding tonight really useful, and we'd love your feedback more broadly. And if you go to the very top of the chat box at tonight's, at the start of tonight's session, there's a link to a survey that we would love you to do to help us learn more about how we can make sure that these events continue to be useful and powerful for you all. And I'd also like to bring your attention to a couple of other events we have coming up, because we think we're doing a really great job of bringing you some really fantastic people. So keep on registering and coming along and telling all your friends. And if you've loved tonight, also Rachel's presentation will be up on our YouTube channel from tomorrow, and please do share and let other people know about her fabulous work. Coming up next, we've got Dave O'Neill, the comedian. This is also part of our Bendigo Cares project. So we reckon that carers have been even more invisible and under the pump during COVID. And so we thought perhaps a bit of humour might be a really good care tool from us to you. So he's coming Tuesday, the 23rd of March at 7 p.m. And I also wanted to let you know that we are planning for libraries for the future at the moment, and we've got a big community consultation out. We've got surveys across all our libraries in the Goldfields region, which covers 4 shires, and if you're in our region you'll know what they are. So please do go to our website and fill out our survey, or pop into the libraries, and you can scribble on the butcher's paper on the wall if you don't have time for a survey, or pick up a quick flyer. We'd really love your input and contributions so that we can make sure that our library services continue to meet your needs and your interests and serve our communities long into the future. So thank you again, Rachel, so much for tonight. It's just been an absolute treat. I'm so delighted. As you said, we have worked together, and I was so keen to bring you to my community, and I'm delighted to work in a workplace that is able to welcome fabulous speakers and this wonderful technology that means that we could afford to bring you to us. And we've also got Rachel's photographs in Bendigo Library coming up very soon. So pop in and see those if you're in the region. Thanks again, Rachel, and everyone for coming tonight.
My privilege. Thank you.
I love the positiveness. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lorraine.
Yeah.
Was like clapping.
Yes.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Beautiful.
Good night, everyone.